Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fantasy Life Props and Chops episode. I'm Matthew Freedman, Matt at the Oracle, and I'm here with Geoff Ulrich, a.k.a. the Fantasy Grind. Geoff, you survived the regular season and the holiday season. How's it going?
It's going pretty good, man. I mean, I'm set up for this week. This is 6 good games. I think it's going to be a competitive playoffs, and we got a ton of props to talk about as well. So it's going to be a good weekend.
Yeah, a lot of props. In this episode, we're going to be highlighting our favorite player props for every wildcard game, as well as how we view that game and how we might want to approach it in our Guillotine Leagues CHOPPionship, which I think is the coolest fantasy football playoff contest around. Geoff, you and Matt LaMarca wrote a strategy article for the CHOPPionship. You guys also wrote a article for the Guillotine, which is our smaller league that people can play in with up to 5 people in the playoffs. And for my final Freedman's favorites of the season, I also broke down my strategy for the tournament, highlighted players I like for the CHOPPionship. I kind of don't know about you, but like in previous seasons, I've always been like, I obviously love the NFL playoffs, but always been like a little bit conflicted, like a little bit sad, because it also means like the end of the fantasy season for most people. And now with the CHOPPionship, with the Guillotines, we can keep on living that sweet, sweet fantasy life into the postseason. And Geoff, for my money, I think this weekend and next weekend, the wild card round and divisional round, I think they offer us, in terms of like combined quantity and quality, the best football we get all year. So super excited for the games we have this weekend. 6 games this weekend, 6 games next weekend, all standalone games, all teams that are at worst average. Some of the best teams in the league, all teams fully motivated. There could be some blowouts this weekend. We're going to talk about that. But even the games with larger spreads, I think, could be pretty entertaining. We're going to hit on all of them in our playoffs preview presented by DraftKings. All right, Geoff, let's start with the first Saturday game of Super Wildcard Weekend. Chargers at Texans. Now, normally you look at the home teams. These teams normally favored. The Chargers, however, favored on the road, favored by 3. Looking at our odds page right now, looking at the DraftKings odds, Chargers favored by 3. This is one of only 2 games played indoors this weekend. The indoor playoff games typically trend over, but of course the Chargers have been an under team this year, one of the best defenses in the league, and a really methodical type of offense. So 42.5, 41.5 is the total for this game. Question is to really how many points we're going to see. The Texans have also been a real under team. And so from a CHOPPionship perspective, it kind of creates this scenario where the Texans are the higher seeded team, but they're underdogs at home. Whoever wins this game is very likely playing the Chiefs in the next round. And so if you get contrarian, if you kind of think I want to fade the Chiefs, you'd probably go with one of these teams. It definitely, for me, it can't be the Texans. The Chargers are intriguing as a potential contrarian option just because they are in the same division as the Chiefs. If one of these teams, I think, had an actual chance of going into Arrowhead and punching the Chiefs in the mouth and somehow getting a win, I do think it could be the team with a top 8 quarterback and a top 8 NFL head coach. And by the way, the Chargers with Harbaugh has like a penchant for making conference championships in the NFL. Like, I just think like a Harbaugh-led team could be a little bit dangerous. So in the CHOPPionship perspective, if I'm going with one of these teams, if I'm stacking, and stacking is something you want to do, you have 14 players that you can have on your rosters. You want to stack 4 teams, hoping that you can get 2 of them to the Super Bowl. The Chargers potentially could be one of those teams that I think, all right, maybe they don't get to the Super Bowl, but they could get to the conference championship game and at least be in a spot to compete for the Super Bowl. The Chargers, if I'm looking at the CHOPPionship, thinking of stacking a team, it is the Chargers. It is not the Texans. What are your thoughts for this game and for ways that you might approach it from the CHOPPionship perspective?
No, and obviously if you're playing on Guillotine Leagues and going in the CHOPPionship, there's no salary cap. You're just picking 14 players, filling out a starting lineup. I love Justin Herbert personally in this playoffs. I think he could have a big playoffs. And I do think the Chargers are live. It's like you said, I see them potentially having a path. They're in a very winnable game. They're favorites on the road. The Texans are just, maybe their defense comes up with some big plays or they get some special teams plays, but the Chargers are the better offense, in my opinion. They have the better quarterback right now, and they're familiar with the Chiefs. So if you're building CHOPionship lineups, I like pairing the Lions with the Chargers because the Chargers give you good leverage, likely against the Chiefs, who they're probably going to play in round 2 if they beat the Texans. So you always got to play to be right in the CHOPionship. You've got to play for that your teams are going to advance to the path because you want those guys in the conference finals in the Super Bowl. So if I was playing a lot of Lions, I would probably be fading the Chiefs and hoping that the Chargers could make their way through. They're going to be more of a contrarian stack. Love Justin Herbert, like I said. If I took Herbert, would consider potentially pairing him with like a Josh Allen as well. You get 2 quarterbacks on the same side of the draw, or on likely different sides of the draw in the AFC, depending on how it breaks down. But I kind of like that pairing. You could also pair him with Goff if you're going with the Lions. So, Quentin Johnston, maybe even a Will Dissly. I think there's a few different ways to play the Chargers, but they're pretty condensed, with the targets going a lot to Ladd McConkey as well.
I'd like to get your quick thoughts on stacking the quarterback position. And so I agree, Herbert is really interesting to me. My theory is that if I'm stacking, obviously, I think 2 quarterbacks is what you want to go with in this contest. Any more than that feels like overkill at the position, especially keeping in mind that you can have only 1 quarterback in the Super Bowl. You want to get 6 players in your lineup for the Super Bowl. You can start only 1 quarterback in the settings that we have. And so I'm thinking you want to avoid a situation where you have a quarterback stacked from the AFC and a quarterback stacked from the NFC in the Super Bowl. So I'm thinking that if I'm going with 2 quarterbacks, I probably want them both in the same conference. And so, I think Josh Allen could be really popular in this contest. Lamar Jackson could also be really popular. I think that Herbert is a quarterback I would be really tempted to go with, especially if I want to be contrarian in an anti-Chiefs take. Herbert would be the guy that I would probably look to pair with Lamar or with Josh Allen. Geoff, thoughts on kind of stacking the quarterback position?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, stacking is obviously if you're going on a team and you want to going heavy on a team and thinking they're going to make the Super Bowl, stacking a quarterback is essential in my opinion. So I agree with you. Like you generally probably want to stay away from going NFC, AFC. You can do it, but you're potentially wasting a roster spot as well. Because like you said, you can only start 1 quarterback in the Super Bowl. So really trying to just get things right there. If you do go with 1 quarterback, make sure it's an elite one like a Lamar Jackson or something. But stacking is also a way to differentiate yourself, right? Like when you're looking at the Chargers, everyone's going to play Ladd McConkey, and that's fine. He gets a huge target share. You probably should. But if you're going with a third option, you could think a little bit out of the box because this is a big, big contest. You've got to beat a lot of people. So always keep in mind that that's one way to differentiate. Taking like Stone Smart, just as a name to throw out there, will definitely differentiate yourself. I'm not suggesting you do that, but that's a way that you could potentially really set yourself apart. If the Chargers get to the Super Bowl, sure, there'll be some Herbert lineups. There's probably not going to be many Herbert Stone Smart lineups. So just to throw that out there as an example, it's not a good example, but there's better contrarian plays out there. But that's just a way that you can use stacking to kind of set yourself apart as well.
All right, looking at the prop market, the guy that I am looking to, of course, human wet blanket that I am, the guy I'm looking to bet against in this Chargers at Texans game, Nico Collins, I'm going under 88.5 receiving yards at DraftKings -110. I have this projected at 81.2. And this is nothing against Nico Collins, who I think is, top 10 wide receiver in the league. But if you look at what he's done the past month, he hasn't gone over this number. And part of that is just what has been an underperforming offense for the Texans. And then they also have a tough matchup going against the Chargers in this spot. Chargers, top 3, top 5 defense in the league. And because of how it is that the Texans sequence their plays, I think they're going to be running more than they probably should. And then when they are throwing, I think they will be in obvious throwing situations, which will make it easier for the Chargers at that point to defend Nico Collins. So I think fewer pass game opportunities than we might expect in general for the Texans, and then maybe kind of like lower quality of pass game opportunities just because of how it is that offensive coordinator Bobby Slowick calls his plays. So I'm going under Nico Collins, 88.5. Jeff, any thoughts on that one?
I mean, you pretty much just explained why I like the Chargers in this game. The Texans offense is just very, what I would call inefficient. They're very easy to read. Like when I can look at the game and I'm like, oh yeah, the Chargers or the Texans are going to pass here. Oh no, they're going to run Mixon here. It's not great. So they tend to telegraph things like that. And the thing about Nico Collins, like these big name wide receivers, the totals tend to creep up during the week. People love to bet the overs. This one's crept up to almost 90 yards. It's a big number. I mean, I don't fault you at all for taking the under in this situation. I just think this number is too big. I'm not going to bet the over in it. I'm going to go to the other side of this game for my props. And I will give a shout out. I think if there is one over I like on the Texans, it's John Mechie. He's a little bit banged up earlier in the week. I'm not sure if DraftKings has his lines out, but it's a pretty low line for John Mechie. That would be one Texans over I would consider. But I'm going to go to the other side of this game and take an over. And I'm going to go with Will Disley. It's funny, I already mentioned the tight end position a couple times for the Chargers, but Will Disley is entrenched as that pass-catching tight end. He's over 3.5 receptions. It's plus 135 on DraftKings. It's a big number. And I know 4 catches for Will Disley is pretty big too, but he's been over this in 7 of 11 games since the bye week. So he's a pretty reliable wide receiver or tight end. And the thing is, like, the Chargers don't use him a ton down the field. So he's really what I would say just running like high percentage routes where he gets, pretty easy targets. Justin Herbert's been a very accurate quarterback over the last few games. He had a 71% route rate in his last game. And the other reason I like this one for Disley to potentially catch 4 or 5 passes, Josh Palmer's out. Quentin Johnson's banged up. He's got a Q tag. I expect Disley to act as like potentially just that sort of wide receiver 3 in this spot and potentially just be relied on a little bit more than people think. So, plus 135, we've got a 42% implied odds. Like I said, he's gone over this in 7 of his last 11 games. I think this number is just a little bit too big. I think plus 135, some pretty decent values. So, again, I'm not asking for Will Disley to get 100 yards, but over 3.5 receptions, I think very doable in the spot in a dome with some of the injury issues that the Chargers are facing.
Yeah, I agree with that. No Josh Palmer, Quentin Johnson injured. That's a big possibility there for Will Disley. All right, so of course that is not the only game that we have on Saturday. There's also Steelers at Ravens. First, though, I want to talk about our friends at Game Time. Jeff, there's nothing like being at a game in person. And now that the regular season is over, we have a little more time for recreation. And the Mavs are playing in Boston against the Celtics in a few weeks. And I'm thinking about going to that game. I don't know if I actually want to do it because I'd be terrified that the Mavs will lose. And then I will be there by myself in Boston with Celtics fans pointing at me, laughing at me as a Mavericks fan. But I'm still interested in doing it. And if I do it, obviously I will get my tickets through Game Time, my go-to for finding amazing tickets for all kinds of events, not just sports. And thanks to Game Time Picks, which is a new feature in the Game Time app, it is so easy to find tickets because Game Time Picks curates your experience in the app so you can see the best deals on great seats for the types of events that you care about. It is a total game changer. Game Time takes all of the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LIFE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and use the code LIFE, L-I-F-E, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right. On Saturday night, we have the Steelers at the Ravens. I mean, okay, Ravens favored by a lot. It's not quite 10 points, but it has touched 10. It has bounced back down to 9.5, but this game could get to 10 by the time it kicks off. And then, of course, divisional game, outdoor game, 43.5 is the total. Outdoor unders have just crushed historically in the playoffs. And AFC North outdoor games tend to go under as well. So there might not be all that many points in this game, but I think it's going to be a really entertaining one for the purposes of watching football. And in thinking about the CHOPionship, the Ravens, I think they're going to be pretty popular in this spot, but it's going to be like for people who are really thinking about it, you're going either Bills or Ravens. You can't really do both because these teams are very likely to play each other in the divisional round. And so I think the Ravens will be the go-to team for people who are like, you know what, I'm putting the fade on the Bills. So maybe they won't be quite as popular as they should be, or they otherwise would be if they weren't likely to play the Bills next week, but I still think they will be pretty popular. And I think one of the big questions is, if you are stacking Lamar Jackson, are you also going with Derrick Henry? Are you trying to be a little bit contrarian? Which of the pass catchers do you go with? Do you go with Mark Andrews? Do you go with Zay Flowers? Zay Flowers out this week, so you can't use him this week, but that can make him really contrarian. If this team is able to get to the Super Bowl, almost no one might have Zay Flowers because they didn't want him because he can't play this week. So some really interesting dynamics at play with the Ravens. And then I'll just say, Steelers, whatever, like you have no chance. You are not winning this game. Like, from the betting perspective, maybe you'd be interested in Steelers plus 9.5, something like that. This could be like a quote unquote Tomlin spot. But from the CHOPionship perspective, I think it's Ravens. It's all Ravens if you're not going with the Bills. And then the question is just exactly who on this team are you getting onto your CHOPionship roster? How are you looking at this game?
So, yeah. I mean, it's funny because, like, I do think Pittsburgh is live to potentially win. Like, I think they have a puncher's chance. But even, like, just from the Guillotine League, from the CHOPionship perspective, I still wouldn't, even if I was fading the Ravens, I wouldn't be going, like, with a 3-man Steeler stack because I don't think they'd get past the next round anyways. So maybe you put in George Pickens and that's it. But there's no way I would burn 3 spots on the Steelers. So talking about the Ravens, I do think, just because I do think they'll be the most popular play in the entire contest. And I think that, like, Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, and probably Mark Andrews might be the most popular 3-man stack in the contest. So I would personally stack Lamar and Derrick Henry. It gives you access to all the Ravens touchdowns, essentially. There is the chance that they connect for a screen or something as well. So there's a little bit of correlation, but how you approach that third spot is going to be really interesting. I like the Zay Flowers idea. Personally, I think he's super important to this offense. And I think that's part of the reason why I think the Steelers are a little bit live to win this game. But you could get kind of a little bit crazy too. Isaiah Likely and fade Mark Andrews, I think, is an option. I'm just going to throw Nelson Aguilar again. It's so gross and disgusting. People are like, you really want to put Nelson Aguilar in your lineup? But he is going to play a role. He's going to likely start here against the Steelers. If Zay Flowers stays out or that knee just doesn't get better, Aguilar could be on the field a lot in these playoffs. So that's probably the name I would gravitate towards if I was trying to get creative or just build a more contrarian Ravens 3-man stack. I think that's a good way to approach it. And like I said, for the Steelers, it would be kind of more like a one and done thing. Like, I would put Pickens in if I was fading the Ravens, because if the Steelers do come through here, like, you get a ton of leverage on these Ravens lineups. All the Ravens lineups will essentially be dead. So I think, like, getting Pickens for a couple weeks is probably worth it. Maybe a Jalen Warren, but I wouldn't get too overzealous with the Steelers personally. Like I said, probably a one and done kind of thing, and just target their best offensive player, which is Pickens, and just leave it at that.
Yeah, for me, I'm not even touching the Steelers at all because, like, I think the purpose of being contrarian is, like, trying to be contrarian for the Super Bowl. But if I don't think the Steelers have any chance of making the Super Bowl, and if I don't think I'm likely to get even 2 games of production out of George Pickens, I probably don't want him on the team. And I think you're right. Pickens is the only guy that I would really consider on the Steelers and not really even considering him. I like the idea that you mentioned, kind of the call out of with Derrick Henry, with Lamar Jackson, you are likely to get all of the touchdowns in this game, in their future games. And that leads me to the prop that I like most for this game. Derrick Henry, anytime touchdown, minus 190 at DraftKings. And I will say, I know that minus 190, like, those are significant odds, but I don't think that they are long, or rather short enough. I have Derrick Henry projected for 0.84 touchdowns in this game. I think his odds should be around minus 250 to score a touchdown. There was this really long stretch, or I say really long, but a month-long stretch, and that feels like a long time for someone like Derrick Henry when he wasn't scoring a touchdown. So basically from late November to right before Christmas, Derrick Henry had 4 straight games where he didn't score a touchdown. Since then, 2 games, 3 touchdowns. All of the games before that, literally every game, he had scored a touchdown. So I think people might still be thinking like Derrick Henry can't super be trusted to score a touchdown, but especially with Zay Flowers out, I think they're all the likelier to run near the goal line. Lamar Jackson, as great as he is as a runner, he does not steal goal line carries from his running backs. So if they get near the goal line, it's not going to be Josh Allen. It's not going to be Jalen Hurts getting it in for the end zone. It's going to be Derrick Henry. So Derrick Henry minus 190. I like him to find the end zone here. Geoff, thoughts on Derrick Henry, and then what is your prop?
I know. I mean, DraftKings has trouble probably pricing this prop every week. They don't want to make it. It's just hard to price these guys short enough, right? Like Derrick Henry has averaged a touchdown a game. He had 18 touchdowns in the regular season. So actually over a touchdown a game, excuse me. So, like minus 190, like you said, it sounds like a short number. It's just really not short enough considering like his role is and his usage, obviously, but also just his historical like production in the touchdown department in this Ravens offense. So I would definitely play that, especially if it was above or at minus 200. Definitely a worthwhile prop to add to your portfolio. Again, I'm going to go to the other side of this game. I'm going to stick with the receivers. I do like George Pickens for a bounce back week. I mean, I know he's coming off like the worst game of his career. Challenging fans to fight's never a great idea, especially when you had one catch in the game. But the first thing I did this week was bet Derrick Henry or George Pickens is over on his receptions at 3.5. Now, that number has gone down significantly. It's minus 170 to go over 3.5 receptions on DraftKings. I would rather now bet George Pickens's over on his receiving yards. It's 53.5, minus 115 on DK, but I think that's fine. Historically, this is a really low number for George Pickens. When he gets down around this number, it's typically just a good time to buy low. He went for 8 catches, 89 yards versus the Ravens in their first matchup. And, the Ravens as a defense did improve quite a bit in the secondary and as a pass defense in the second half of the year, but I still think it's a very winnable matchup for George Pickens. He went over 3.5 receptions in 5 of 8 games with Russell Wilson this season. So, it was a fairly efficient sort of combo. Russell Wilson, still a pretty good deep ball, does not mind taking shots with George Pickens. It didn't work. Didn't work that well the last few games. They got a little bit unlucky. They faced a few tougher defenses. So what? I mean, this is a very talented player in a playoff game. The Steelers are not going to throw the ball to George Pickens. So I just think it's a good buy low spot. We have this project with a little bit of value at these numbers. And like I said, I think right now with where the numbers are at, I'd rather go over the yardage props on George Pickens rather than take the shorter number on the over receptions.
Steelers 9.5 point road dogs. They're going to need to throw the ball a little bit. And so I'm with you. I haven't bet this yet. I might add this to my card. I have Pickens projected for 61.3. So like you, I do see some value at this number. All right. So those are the 2 Saturday games. We of course have 3 games on Sunday, but before that, let's talk about New Era. All right. I got my Cowboys baseball hat on. Of course, rocking the New Era. Stand for change with the New Era cap, the official cap of the NFL. The Inspire Change collection is a part of their commitment with the NFL to break barriers and create opportunities in communities of color. With black team logos set against official team color crowns and finished with the first ever on-field pin. This collection is for the change makers. Join the movement with the official cap of the NFL, available now at New Era Cap. The NFL does not profit from the sale of Inspire Change products. Charitable contributions are awarded by the NFL Foundation directly to NFL's Inspire Change nonprofit partners. For more information, please visit www.nfl.com/inspirechange. All right, we've got the Sunday games. 3 games we have here. Broncos at the Bills. And I will say, Geoff, you said you think that the Ravens will be the most popular stack. I think it's hard to know if it's going to be the Ravens or it's going to be the Bills. I think it's going to be one of those. And if you're right, if it is the Ravens, give me all the Bills, because I can see the Bills making it all the way to the Super Bowl. Love the idea of Josh Allen. James Cook, I think, is an extremely underappreciated running back. Like, people will talk about James Cook as if like he can't be trusted. The guy ended up having the most touchdowns as a running back, running the ball out of anyone in the league. Like, even with Josh Allen stealing all of the goal line carries, James Cook had 16 rushing touchdowns this year.
He's
Added two
potentially
more.
the most underrated like season for fantasy James Cook had. I just hear no one ever mention James Cook. It's insane for how many touchdowns he had. Sorry.
Yeah. No, give me all the Josh Allen, all the James Cook. And I think Khalil Shakir is also underappreciated as a pass catching option. And I will say, I think one of the great things about the CHOPionship is that you can draft some guys with the idea of, I will use him in the Super Bowl. I can be somewhat contrarian with this guy in the Super Bowl, but I don't need to use him any week before that. And so there could be some guys like that for the Bills. Like, if you wanted one of the tight ends, right? If you wanted Dalton Kincaid, if you wanted Dawson Knox as someone that you could have to be contrarian with in the Super Bowl, you could do that. I think Allen, Cook, Shakir, I think that's fine on its own as a stack for the Super Bowl. But if you wanted to get a little bit weird, if you wanted to stack one of the other wide receivers, if you wanted to go with Amari Cooper, right? If you wanted to do that, you could. I don't know if that would be a great idea, but could you see Amari Cooper scoring a touchdown in the Super Bowl? Like, that could certainly happen. The Bills this past year just drafted a rookie wide receiver. They haven't gotten much out of him, but like, this could be the time in the playoffs where they really start to use him a little bit more. There are lots of ways, I think, of approaching the Bills, but I think it starts, obviously, Josh Allen, James Cook, and I think Shakir is fine as your third option, but you can get a little bit weird with some of the options because they have a lot of potential pass catchers on that team. And then I'll just say, I'm not touching any of the Broncos. I have no interest in the Broncos in the CHOPionship. But how are you approaching the Bills? Because I think a lot of this competition comes down to what it is that people do with the Bills. Do they go heavy on the Bills or do they fade the Bills?
Yeah, it is really interesting. Like, I think the Bills and Ravens obviously will be head to head for most popular. I think that your call out Josh Allen, James Cook, Khalil Shakir makes the most sense to me. Love Shakir. Obviously that stack is going to be popular. So, if you wanted to get, like, Josh Allen just accounts for so many touchdowns, and there is a chance where, James Cook, just the touchdowns dry up in the playoffs. So I think I was getting really contrarian, and I still wanted to go heavy on the Bills. Maybe I was putting multiple lineups in. I would definitely leave Cook out of at least one Bills lineup. Josh Allen with two pass catchers, I think, is probably like good leverage against the James Cook lineup. So you could, and because there's so many options too, you could go Josh Allen, Shakir, and Cooper, or throw in Dalton Kincaid. And like you said, if you're big on the Bills anyways, Kincaid's probably going to be there for you in the Super Bowl to be your tight end. So how you approach the Bills, Josh Allen, James Cook, that's how most people will start. So if you're going to go that third wheel and go with the two popular Bills to start, Amari Cooper probably would stand out to me as the guy to get a little bit contrarian with. I don't think he'll be like, super low owned or anything, but certainly I don't think a ton of people will be using him as the number 3. So Bills are really interesting. I think that if you're using the Bills, you're probably thinking about fading the Chiefs as well. That's one possibility. And I think the Bills work pretty good with the Lions, although that's going to be a very popular play as well. So the other thing you could think about is, well, if I'm going popular with the popular teams in the AFC, maybe you take a different approach in the NFC and think about fading those Lions and think about, like, maybe the Rams can get them in round 2 and use the Rams as kind of a comeback stack to play against the Bills. So a lot of things out there. There's different ways to differentiate, but the Bills are going to be another popular one. Just keep that in mind. And like you said, I'm not going to waste any more time talking about the Broncos and the CHOPionship because I just don't see it. I could see it with the Steelers, quite frankly. I can't see it with the Broncos.
All right. Well, looking at the props, I know I just said I really like Josh Allen, and then I'm going to say, hey, I'm going under Josh Allen, 42 and a half rushing yards. I love Josh Allen for the CHOPionship. In terms of the market this week, under 42 and a half, I think offers value, minus 110 at DraftKings. The projection that I have is 35.4, and Allen historically has actually kind of picked up the pace with which he runs in the playoffs, but I don't think we're going to see that in this game. The Bills are big favorites at home. I don't think they're going to need to use Josh Allen much as a designed runner. And then I think they are going to get a pretty big lead. And then I think they can just rely on their stable of running backs to be able to grind out the clock. So I don't think Allen as a designed runner or really as a scrambler is going to need to do much. So that puts me on 42 and a half, looking at the under at DraftKings. Geoff, in terms of the prop market, what is it that stands out to you in this game?
Again, I'm going to go to the other side. I'm going to stick with the sort of theme I've been on here the last game as well. I'm going to stick with taking the big underdog and thinking that they're going to be in a lot of passing situations in this game. And I'm going to go Javonte Williams over 2.5 receptions. This is plus 105 on DK. So still getting that plus money here. And I think this prop is, again, just the price just a little bit too big. Javonte Williams has a pretty clearly defined role in this offense. He's the long down and distance. He's the pass catching back. They love Javonte Williams because he's such a good pass protector. So he's not the greatest early down rusher. Jaleel McLaughlin gets mixed in. We see Estimate, but you know what? Like, Javonte Williams is going to be on the field. And we've seen that all season long. Even when he has a bad game, the Broncos put him back out there because he's so good at pass blocking. He's a good pass catcher as well. And they're going to need him in this game because they're big underdogs. And the Bills offense is just absolutely like the most efficient offense in the league. And they're not going to be able to stop them every single time the Bills have the ball. So Javonte Williams, 3+ receptions in 9 of 17 games this year. So he's got over 2.5 receptions in over half his games. The Bills allow the second most receptions to opposing running backs. It's not the strength of their defense. They allow those dump offs in the middle of the field, those short, easy catches. Javonte Williams, like I said, a good pass catcher, efficient. And then, I would potentially even look to play his alt lines in here. Like, you can get plus 850 for Javonte Williams to go 40+ receiving yards. That sounds like a lot. He had 50+ receiving yards last week. He's gotten over 40 receiving yards in multiple games this season. So, again, I think the setup is good for Javonte Williams to be to put up some numbers as a pass catcher, and he's just a good pass catching back. I like this number on DK. I would play the over here down to at least plus 100, potentially even like minus 105.
All right, so those are the 3 AFC games that we have this weekend. We're going to the NFC side of the bracket on Sunday. We have the Eagles hosting the Packers. The Eagles now favored, looking at the odds here, Eagles now favored by 5 at home. And I will say, like, I kind of get it. The Packers are a little bit beat up, but the Packers are an intriguing team. I would say that they are one of the 8 best teams in the league. I have them number 6 right now in my power ratings. And so if they are able to get by the Eagles, and is it all that hard to imagine the Eagles losing in the playoffs, like Nick Sirianni doing Nick Sirianni-esque kind of things and the Eagles collapsing, and then all of a sudden the Packers, I mean, they did it to my Cowboys last year in the wild card round. The Packers all of a sudden look like a team that might be on the rise. The Packers, I think, could be a way to get some leverage if you are looking to get a little bit contrarian in the CHOPionship. But I also think the Eagles on their own, totally fine stacking options that you have there. And I think the question would be, do you go with Jalen Hurts? And if so, are you also putting Saquon Barkley in there? Are you kind of looking at Hurts and Barkley as kind of the Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry version in the NFC? But then, of course, you've also got A.J. Brown that you could stack in there. You got Devontae Smith. And if you want to get really weird, I think you could also put Dallas Goedert, who I think will be super contrarian if the Eagles make it to the playoffs. But, I mean, Goedert on his own is a pretty good option within that offense anyway. So I think a lot of interesting possibilities in this game. And that I haven't even mentioned Josh Jacobs, who, if he is able to get to the Super Bowl, even if he's able to give you just 2 games of production, could end up being a real difference maker. So interested in a number of the players in this game. What stands out to you, Geoff?
No, absolutely. I mean, I view Philly very similar to how I view the Ravens. Like, you want to get access to all the touchdowns. I mean, Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley, like they just dominate the goal line. I mean, you could potentially have games where like Hurts and Saquon just rush for 2 touchdowns each, and that's all the scoring. And so I think starting with those guys makes sense. I would consider potentially like an Eagles lineup where you don't even have Jalen Hurts, but I don't know. I think that most likely, like if a Philly lineup gets there, Philly gets to the Super Bowl, you're going to see some kind of lineup with Hurts and Saquon get there. So again, it all comes down to the third key. AJ Brown is the going to be the very popular third wheel in those lineups, but Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert, certainly enough upside where over a small 3-game sample they could outperform, or even just like a 1-game sample where if you get your Philly lineup to the Super Bowl and Goddard has a massive game and AJ Brown doesn't do much, you're going to be in a great spot. So there's not as many intriguing options down the lineup for Philly. Like we're not like starting Jahan Dotson or something like that. I can't even really think of any other names, to be honest. But certainly Goddard stands out as the option. And I think Green Bay is really interesting. I do think they're live in this game. Tucker Kraft would kind of be my call out for a nice, like really low on play. If you're thinking of stacking the Packers, and they are live, they're only plus 4.5 underdogs. I think like a Kraft, Jordan Love lineup would be good. And like you said, Josh Jacobs, if the Green Bay Packers get by this game, he's got a shot to be like one of the highest producing running backs in the playoffs. So Jacobs, Tucker Kraft, Green Bay has a lot of options. And certainly if you're not playing the Eagles, like if you're going Lions, I think Green Bay, their players definitely have some appeal.
All right. In the prop market, I am looking at Jalen Hurts and going under 214.5 passing yards. And, I mentioned earlier the idea that, hey, maybe you could actually go with the Eagles unstacked with Jalen Hurts. Like, I think in the Super Bowl, an Eagles trio of Saquon and AJ Brown and Devonta Smith, that could still be intriguing knowing that you can only have one quarterback in there. And some of that is because Jalen Hurts just isn't throwing it nearly as much as you would maybe expect, given how prolific this offense is. Jalen Hurts also injured coming into this game, dealing with concussion, dealing with a finger injury. I expect him to be close to fully healthy, but maybe just because he's hasn't played in a while, there's a little bit of rust in the first half of the game. They're not throwing the ball as much, and then the Eagles, as home favorites, also could get out to a lead and then use Saquon Barkley, who didn't play in Week 18, so kind of in effect could have the benefit of coming off of a bye, and maybe they use him a little bit more. So all of that puts me on the under for Jalen Hurts, 214.5 passing yards. I have this projected under that at around 208. So I like the under on Jalen Hurts. Geoff, what stands out to you in the prop market this week?
I just taking a look at Jordan Love's props, one just stuck out. I mean, he's got a rushing prop on DraftKings, 5.5 rush yards. Now, I mean, I do like the over here. Like, again, Jordan Love hasn't run a lot. I mean, he's actually been like almost just like a statuesque pocket quarterback in some respects, but he's mobile. Like he can run. That's the thing. So he's ripped off big gains. He's run for big touchdowns. And I see this matchup. We're in the playoffs. These quarterbacks just tend to sort of take off a little bit more. Patrick Mahomes is the best example. So I like over 5.5 rush yards. It's minus 105 on DraftKings. I think the Eagles pass rush is going to force Jordan Love out of the pocket more. There's going to be more broken down pockets. And I think there's going to be a couple scrambles here from Jordan Love. Again, we're in the playoffs. Guys aren't, saving their bodies for next week. This is all out. So I think you're going to see Love break off a couple runs here. And I like this one. This has gotten down to just ridiculously low territory for Jordan Love. I think you'll see Jordan Love break off a couple runs in this game. And I do like the over here at just 5.5.
I think it's a great call out. I have this projected at 7.9. I haven't bet it, but I will be tempted to do that. As you mentioned, quarterbacks, they just tend to run a little bit more in the playoffs. Much more is on the line, and they are just a little bit more willing to put their bodies on the line whenever they get pressure in the pocket. So I like that one. Jordan Love over 5.5. All right, of course, we have Sunday Night Football coming up. But first, let's get a word from our very good friends at Bud Light.
Sunday. Time to suit up
This thing like half zips, kind of quarter zip guy.
and sacrifice your body.
This is fun.
Because no matter how hard you football, it's easy to Sunday.
All right, Sunday night football. We have Commanders at the Bucs. And Geoff, in terms of the CHOPionship and how we would look at this, I don't know if either of these teams really has a great chance to get to the conference championships. And if that's the case, if we don't see any of these teams playing 2 weeks from now in the NFC Championship, I'm probably not going to be that tempted to stack either one of them. And maybe you could get a little bit contrarian and say, okay, the Bucs could get to the NFC Championship game. That could happen, right? And if that's the case, obviously Baker Mayfield, really intriguing. Mike Evans, Bucky Irving, those would be the guys. But I'm looking at Mike Evans and Bucky Irving as probably one-offs, kind of like your unstacked options that you can maybe go with and hope that you get 2 games out of these guys. We do have the Bucs at home favored by 3. I will say I am kind of interested from the betting perspective on the Commanders, but likelier than not, we see the Bucs advance. I do think we see a lot of points in this game. The highest total we have for this game on the slate, 50.5, and Bucs games have gone over more often than not this year. But in terms of the CHOPionship, I really think it's probably Mike Evans, Bucky Irving unstacked, and after that, I'm probably moving on. How are you looking at this game in terms of the CHOPionship?
Yeah, pretty similarly, to be honest. Like, if I'm fading the Eagles, I would probably consider a Tampa Bay stack. I think that like these teams are fairly likely to meet up in round 2. So, like from that perspective, I think that the Buccaneers would have good leverage versus the Eagles. So, like a Mike Evans, Baker Mayfield, Bucky Irving, like I said, that would be the go-to there. There are other options. I mean, you could fade Evans. I think it's actually very viable if you're creating Tampa Bay stacks to fade Mike Evans and put McMillan in, maybe even put Cade Otton in, to be honest. But Bucky Irving would be an absolute must for me. The Commanders I'd view more as a one-off. Like you, like I do like the Commanders in this game. I just can't see them getting even to the conference championship. It just feels like a little bit of a bridge too far. So like Austin Eckler, who we're going to talk about here in a second, as a contrarian option, obviously Jaden Daniels, if you are playing like, again, to fade the Bucs, that's fine. I think that the Commanders, if you're fading the Lions just quickly, the Commanders probably have a little bit more value because they're likely to meet up with the Lions in round 2. So if you're loading up on Jaden Daniels, it probably makes sense not to take the Lions and maybe load up on the favorites in the AFC. So just a strategy thought there for the Commanders, because if they do win, they're going to be the 6th seed. Unless Green Bay upsets the Eagles, the Commanders should meet the Lions in round 2. So just, again, strategy, CHOPionship has a lot of that. But I'm not too heavy on either of these teams. I was going to stack one, probably be Tampa.
All right. In the prop market, you mentioned Austin Eckler. You and I are both betting on Eckler this week. I like over 18.5 rushing yards. I have this projected at 26.7. Geoff, I know you also like Austin Eckler in the receiving department. For me, it's just a guy who's a veteran, likely to get a little more playing time. Eckler, a very good player. And even if they don't use him as their bell cow, he still gets enough work in the running game to where I think this number of 18.5 is just a little too low. Geoff, what is it that you like about Austin Eckler? You like him in the receiving game.
I mean, I like him in the receiving game, but I like him to go over 18.5 rush yards too. I think that number is too low. I think all his numbers are just a little too low. I bet Austin Eckler when he came out, put it in our free bet tracker on Fantasy Life, over 15.5 receiving yards, excuse me. That's now up to 17.5 on DraftKings minus 110. I would still play it, quite frankly. He averaged 3 receptions, 30 yards receiving. One of the best pass catching backs still, Austin Eckler. So, averaging over 10 yards per catch. The slide is a lot lower than his regular season lines too. Austin Eckler typically had receiving totals 20, 21, 22.5. So we're just buying low here. Obviously he had the injury layoff, but he played last week. I think he's going to be important for the Commanders in this game. That's the main thing. I think Eckler is going to be an important piece here. Went for over 50 yards receiving versus Tampa in week 1. I like all the Austin Eckler overs this week. I'm not going to lie. I think he's even probably not a decent anytime touchdown bet, to be honest.
All right, let's get to Monday Night Football. And this, I think, is one of the most intriguing games that we have of the week. It's the Vikings, quote unquote, at the Rams. This game originally scheduled, obviously, to be in LA with the fire situation there. This game has been moved to Arizona. And so with that, the Vikings have become even bigger favorites now that home field advantage isn't in play for the Rams. The Vikings favored by 2.5 in this spot. This is the second game that we have indoors. 47.5 is the total. A lot of ways that you could go with this game from the CHOPionship perspective. And, I said, I think a lot of this contest will come down to how it is that people approach the Bills. I also think that a lot of this contest could come down to whether one of these teams is able to go as far as we potentially think they could, because the Vikings and the Rams, I think that they are both live to beat the Lions next week. And whoever wins this game, very likely to be playing the Lions next week. And so you have the Vikings in the same division as the Lions. You have the Rams with Sean McVay. I think super interesting options. And both of these teams are stacked with players that you would be happy to have in your lineup next week, the week after that. It's just a question of whether they can get there. But the stacking options are numerous for these teams. So a lot of ways that you could approach this. And I think even if you're thinking of just kind of like one-offs, it's Puka Nacua versus Justin Jefferson, because only one of those big wide receivers is getting through this game. And so it's a question of, even if you're going unstacked with one of those guys, which one you're going with, hoping that you can get him next round as well. The Vikings, as the favorites, would be the side that you would kind of lean to, but a lot of ways that you could approach this game. Geoff, what are your thoughts on this all-important Monday Night Football, Vikings and the Rams?
So I agree with your assessment. I think that these teams are going to be important, and I think both of them would be live down the road. But I take a pretty black and white approach here. I like the Rams. I think they're the team that you should be using here over the Vikings, and I think they're a great leverage target over either the Lions or the Eagles, because there's a chance they might play the Eagles in round 2, assuming the Eagles get past the Packers. Maybe the Commanders upset, but either way, I like the Rams as a leverage target. If you're fading sort of the big teams in the NFC, maybe you're going chalk in the AFC, you're taking the Bills or something, I think the Rams are a great comeback play. They've played the Lions twice recently. They've got Kyren Williams is locked into a massive workload here because Blake Corum's injured. So Kyren Williams is a good back. They run the ball extremely well. I think they're going to be able to take care of the Vikings personally. I think they're going to be able to do a lot of the same things the Lions did to the Vikings in their last game, knock Sam Darnold around a little bit, run the ball more effectively than other teams have against the Vikings. And I think the other approach for the Vikings for the CHOPionship and non-Guillotine Leagues, I don't necessarily think that your Rams stacks have to include Matthew Stafford. So we mentioned Puka Nacua. You could throw Cooper Kupp in and Kyren Williams. So I would almost rather get access to those three players than necessarily include Matthew Stafford. But if you do use Stafford, throwing Demarcus Robinson in instead of, say, potentially in there is an option as well. But I think I like the idea of fading Stafford there. So either way, Rams a great leverage play versus either the Lions or the Eagles, in my opinion. I'm pretty much out on the Vikings. I just think the Rams are better, and I think they will get past them. So taking a stance here, but certainly the Vikings, if you like them, the obvious plays, Jefferson, Addison, etc.
It's interesting because I do have the Rams projected as underdogs in the spot, but just slight underdogs. And I think the market has adjusted too much to the loss of home field advantage for the Rams, because it's not as if the Rams had all that big of a home field advantage anyway. And they're still playing in a stadium in Glendale where the Cardinals play, a stadium that they know they play there once a year. and they still have the travel edge in this spot. The Vikings still having to travel. It's not as if they're traveling all the way to California, but I mean, Minnesota to Arizona versus Minnesota to California, similar thing, not a long travel spot for the Rams. So I still like the Rams in this spot when we're thinking about the market. And there's just something about this matchup of McVay versus Kevin O'Connell where I'm interested in the Rams. And like you, I will say, I think you can go with this team unstacked. That makes me pretty interested in them. And, we've talked about it throughout the show. I think it's worth talking about more here. You want only 2 quarterbacks in this contest. And I will say, I feel like it's 90% that at least one of my quarterback spots is going to be dedicated to Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen. I just kind of can't imagine not having one of those guys. And if I want to stack on a conference to where I know if one of these guys gets through, that gives me a shot of having 6 players in the Super Bowl instead of 5, I will probably be going, let's say either it's Josh Allen or Lamar, and then Patrick Mahomes for the other one. So that's just kind of what I'm thinking right now, which means unstacked, the Rams could be in this spot. When I'm looking at the prop market, Kyren Williams stands out to me in the anytime touchdown department. You mentioned him, -135 at DraftKings. Kyren Williams, one of the league leaders in goal line touches, especially now with no Blake Corum, someone who could just get a ton of work. I have him projected at -203 to score a touchdown this week. So at -135, I think there's significant value, very much like Kyren Williams in this spot. Geoff, who stands out to you in the prop department?
Yeah, I love that number on Kyren Williams. That's a good number. I'm actually finally going to throw in an under here, just to mix things up. Freedman, Aaron Jones under 14.5 carries. This is -125 on DraftKings. I really like this prop. I bet this last week. It hit easily. I think he had 10 carries. He's been under this in 3 of his last 5 games. Cam Akers is a thing. He actually outperformed Aaron Jones last week, and they like to get him some of these early down carries. They even use him around the goal line. Rams aren't really that poor a rush defense. I think that the Vikings also will just be trying to attack these smaller Rams corners with Jefferson, with Jordan Addison. I think Aaron Jones, again, a veteran, a little bit of an older running back. He's sort of lost a little bit of pace here in the second half. The Vikings trying to get Cam Akers more involved. And I really wouldn't be shocked if Akers even saw 8 to 10 carries in this game. So I think Aaron Jones under 14.5 carries. Really like this prop. Like I said, -125 on DK. That's going to be my one under for the show.
The hashtag revenge game for Cam Akers going against the Rams. Not that that's really even a thing, but maybe it's a thing. All right. So Geoff, quickly, I would say if there's one play that you really liked for the CHOPionship, what is it? Your 10-second pitch for it. Who's the one guy you're locking in?
I like the Rams as leverage play. So I'm going to say Puka Nacua.
Puka Nacua, love it. For me, it's chalk. I'm going with Josh Allen. All right, that does it for the Fantasy Life Props and Chops episode for the wild card round. Be sure to catch all of our other episodes and the great content, tools, and rankings we have on the site. For Geoff, I'm Matthew Freeman. Best of luck to you in all of your Guillotine Leagues. And remember, it's not a fantasy if you believe it.